Recording. I don't like that it doesn't tell us now that it started recording.
And we're back. I'm going to get some very good drama points this time.
the, the, the difference between you when you're in your real life, which is you're actually kind of intense, but you're very stoic. And then when you just it's just the dichotomy is I see I stop myself is glorious.
Thank you, sir. I'm on self-help program too here. And I'm continuously recursively improving my presentation, sir.
Okay, well, anyway. Okay, we got to recap a little bit just so the audience knows what we're doing. So on Monday through Friday, we except Thursday, I meet with Brandon and Martin, and we work on the Constitution. Right now, we're working on rights and obligations. So we're essentially working from natural law forward with those guys. And Brad and I are trying to work on first principles, which is the science forward, right? Is that the best way to say it?
Yes.
Right. And the context, which is a little bit rough for me, I gotta admit. And besides, Brad and I are really good at just the other guys are really good at staying on topic, and Brad and I are really good at having fun.
Just parallel processing it in this way. Right.
So in that sense, we're still trying to get what we're really trying to do is get the Constitution out the door as soon as a book as soon as possible.
Right.
Now, so in order to make this work, in both cases, we're consolidating the information from the different sources into one argument using the same structure. Because remember, we've made these arguments from slightly different directions in order to emphasize different points. So we're pulling all these arguments in to make them from the same basic direction. And Brad and I are bringing them in to talk about the first principles. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take these consolidated frames and then copy pasta them over into the right sections of the Constitution. Yes? Right. And because the way the Constitution is set up, our Constitution's problem, the American Constitution, is that it didn't do what we're doing, which is Blackstone was common knowledge, right? Blackstone's, all right. The Enlightenment was common. These all things were common knowledge about the intellectuals of their time. They had just invented, the English had, not long before, the modern state, right? And so, which means the modern rule of law state of monarchy, parliamentary houses, under rule of law. And so they'd invented this system, and they had built the state more on trade than an extraction from production. So this is a repetition of the Athens versus Sparta problem. The continent is Sparta, the Britain, the naval power is Athens. So the Americans took the Roman thing, is let's leave behind the bad parts of those worlds that are all the authorities and make it a fully middle class society. In other words, the people who are responsible for production, distribution, trade are the only moral people, not parasitic on others, and therefore we're going to build a world just for productive people, which is a reductive version of the Protestant ethic in the spirit of capitalism. By the way, it's a reductive version. So less is a purely scientific, non-inspirational, non-religious expression of the same thing. What that meant was that if you have the church, the state, and the peasants as parasites, and you have the productive people here, America was trying to say, this is the way to do things, these productive people, and we're going to organize a society for them. Well, Britain had already sort of done that for different reasons, right? And so Britain had already, with Henry V, had ended the ability of the church to be parasitic, right? The Parliament had ended the ability over the Wars of the Roses, so to speak, for the monarchy to be parasitic. The monarchy ended the ability for the nobility, and the people meant the ability for the nobility to be too parasitic, and the middle class made it impossible for the nobility to be too parasitic. Right. The thing was, the nobility still had a governing responsibility. So you had the monarchy, the nobility, and the middle class now limited to their area of influence. And you had it moderated by the natural common concurrent law and the hierarchy of juries that we call the courts, the parliament, and the king, the monarchy. So and then, it's hard to think of things this way, but they actually figured it out, whether by
right.
Whatever, they got it right.
That's amazing.
Right. And the thing is that all you have to do to make it work out is people can have decidability in matters of conflict, but they can't have authority in the via positiva of command, right? They have only the ability to limit. So you can only create positive assertions, like direct people to do things through the provision of incentives. So, I mean, the English invented this modern state, and it was freaking brilliant. The same way that your Holy Roman Empire had basically built the nobility by the same process. You don't really have any authority or power because the monarchy, that's the only purpose of the German Empire, right? The Holy Roman Emperor. Right. But what you can do is you can use your little freehold or your manor or your microstate to compete against other states, which is really where all this beautiful European nonsense comes from, is the Holy Roman Empire. And then it makes its way in England as the modern state, and then France, being the most backward state in the world, and that's going to be in Europe, tries to go and say, well, we want to create the papacy, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire of authority and centralization, and we want to conquer Europe instead of let this continued competition between small states and large kingdoms continue. And so this is basically, the Germans had it right, the English had it right, the French had it wrong, and they get everything wrong. All right, and the difference is, of course, is that the English could trust the judges because they were just ordinary people brought up in this system. But the French couldn't trust their judges. The judges were corrupt, so they came out with continental law. Well, I mean, that's an admission that I didn't curse again. I stopped myself from cursing again. Amazing. That's an admission that that you failed, right? How do you get your judges to be not corrupt? That they should have solved the problem. How do we get judges to be not corrupt, rather than create continental law, a centralized authority for the production of law, like the church and the Jews and the Muslims do?
I was just going to get a piece of rope and show you the answer. That's how you solve that problem.
Yeah, well, that is the way to solve the problem. I'll tell the story all the time, but every time I got on TV in Ukraine, I said the same thing. We didn't hang them. We hung them, we wouldn't have this problem. Well, the way they're handling corruption today, which is not all that great, I'm going to admit that our folks are right.
What is this admission? That
our folks are right is that if we send money to Ukraine, once it's over there, you can't trust that all of it will go where it's intended.
That was a ridiculous statement. It was so understated, and I want to elaborate on it, my position on this, because it's like it is a money laundering operation, and that's all.
Well, that's not true.
We happen to diverge in our opinions.
It's okay. I don't mind if you're wrong. I
understand that. Wait.
That said, why do you think we send them tanks and equipment and require troops be trained on them? And why do you think we monitor it so carefully? Because like the Russian general there, they haven't got these fucking They did it again. They haven't got engines for tanks. You know why? The guy's been selling them.
Oh, he's made those.
It's just,
Oh,
they haven't got night vision. They haven't got night vision scopes for the why? Because they've been selling them. You know, I mean, it's like the Russian government those shows where the guys bid for like abandoned storage units. That's the Russian government. I'm gonna bid for this storage unit, which is some sort of resource available in Russia, right? And I'm going to pay you so much, right? But then I'm going to steal everything I can get out of the thing. That's Russian government. And then they have the FSB, which is the natural progression of the woke police, right? There's a natural progression of the woke is into becoming the FSB. And what I'm afraid of is it certainly seems like our FBI is becoming the FSB. How the heck did we get on this conversation? I'm trying to talk about how we're organizing the work, right?
yes, sir.
The Constitution.
Constitution, right.
All right, so we're trying
It was because you mentioned the French and that caused you to go down this
Okay.
rabbit hole.
The minute I bring up the French, I just see like the corruption, the great flowering of corruption spreading across the world. Anyway, bad ideas. Anyway, so we've got this. We're trying to put this in place because to get back to making my point, the Constitution doesn't describe the natural common concurrent law. It doesn't actually explain common law or concurrency. It just enacts them, right? It just assumes them. It doesn't explain. It's the Declaration artfully discusses life, liberty, and property, but that or pursuit of happiness originally was property, and that's just sovereignty, right? And demonstrated interests, but it doesn't talk about common interests.
Ah, that's right.
It's all it says is that when a government becomes, hostile to the desires and ends of the population, that they have the right to do. Well, that means the people are sovereign, right? So it means the government isn't sovereign; the people are, and that the people are only sovereign within the limits of the natural law, right? However, that's not stated.
That's right, and that's problematic.
And where it is stated, they use the Enlightenment version of deism as God instead of law of the universe. Now, for me and you, that'd probably be the same fucking thing. Excuse me, I did it again. The same thing.
Yes, but the problem those guys had was they didn't have the technology that we now have developed here,
right?
Which is understanding of the languages and grammars and the logics.
Right.
To be able to explain it in terms of science, which they would have done, but they hadn't got around to it yet.
They actually intuited it. They just didn't articulate it because it was too close to habit and convention, which is generally the problem with conservatives in general, is they speak in convention, tradition, and moral terms. They're actually describing something scientific, but they're doing it in terms that are indefensible by scientific means because they're not causal. They're merely traditional. I mean, they're not even empirical. They're traditional. And traditional means it's survived. Empirical means we can measure it, right? Observe and measure it. And logic means we have the causality behind it. First principles logic means we have the causality behind it. So our Constitution doesn't have that stuff. So we're putting it in there. And why are we doing that? Because most of what we're trying to solve is lying.
Mostly it's irreciprocities. We're solving for the irreciprocities, and they're mostly snuck in by lying.
Lying, exactly. And so we've had to put all this in there. So a lot of people object to putting this level of detail in after the preface, like Article 1. But we really are building up the entire Constitution and all the policies from the first principles of the universe. So we're making it strictly constructive. Now, our ancestors, like you get to Scalia, and he has to remind the court that words are measurements, that words are weights and measures of time and place.
Mhm.
They don't change. The meaning, no, we're just because the meaning of the word changes, right? Especially given that that's what the left does, is try to change the meaning of words. Doesn't mean the weight measure changes, right? That's the whole thing. So the second thing is that's not clear, is law is transactional, like an accounting system.
Mhm.
And so those are weights and measures, and they're transactions. So you can reverse a transaction, you can modify a transaction, but you can't claim a transaction as other than it was.
Right.
And the third thing is that what he failed to get to is that what the public calls strict construction is not what the law calls strict construction. So I have to always use, whenever I use the word, I'm appealing to the common sense version of it, not the court's version of the term. Right? The common sense, and I realize I have to choose one way of looking at a term, and sometimes I'll choose the common sense version, sometimes I'll change the word, because I'm trying to disambiguate something.
Mhm.
And this, in the case of a strict construction, that means formal logical construction from first principles of the universe. What they mean is, I don't want you to be able to lie, cheat, and steal with the law. That's what the public means,
Right.
right? And so we do it through strict. So what we've done is we've created the possibility of strict construction.
Right.
And so what's happened as a result is that it's disturbing to me that all this was intuited, but we had to go and ruin it quite a bit before someone like Scalia comes along and says, what's going wrong here? No, something's gone wrong. Why are we coming up with things that aren't settled law? Why are some of our legal policies failing? In other words, our state policies, legislative policies failing. Why is the court failing to the people? Because we aren't achieving what the purpose of the law is commonality and concurrency. What does commonality mean? We adjudicate differences by the same means. In other words, we agree on what's wrong. What does concurrency mean? We enact policy based on consent and agreement, right? So we prohibit authority, whether that's tyranny of the majority or tyranny of a minority. So we have concurrency in the positiva, in action of law, legislation, and we have commonality. So what does this thing mean? Is our system is organized to make us agree, and our legislative processes are there to make sure we agree to something before it happens. So what is this burden does it place? This is an interesting thing that who got wrong? Peter Zeihan got very wrong. He doesn't understand this. Is that they would say, well, the United States is set up to debate, in other words, to educate the populace so that they will vote concurrently for a positive and tolerate law commonly in the negative decisions of the court. Peter says, well, the British government is sent to govern. What that means is the parliament is sovereign, not the people, and the parliament is only governed by the traditional law, not the natural law.
Oh.
So they have parliamentary sovereignty, where we have the people's sovereignty within the law. They have parliamentary sovereignty within some sense of traditional law, but it still means the tradition is only a drag on parliament. It's not a constraint on parliament. So in the end result here, the United States is organized as very similar to a corporation where nobody has say, right? the people are sovereign. The only way to make that work is that people have to be informed enough to make those decisions. So if we allow politicians to lie to people, the people can't be informed enough to make decisions. If we allow professors, pseudoscientists, public intellectuals, media, entertainment to lie explicitly, or in the case of entertainment, by suggestion. In other words, they do it by suggestive examples. Then we're preventing the formation of rational decision making among the population necessary for the possibility of concurrency. This is also why IQ matters so much, is because you can't have concurrency across a people unable to comprehend something. So you can either say one of two things. We either keep the IQ of the population high enough so that concurrency will be established regardless of the bottom quartile or bottom third, or we have to limit the participation in government to those people who are able to make such decisions, and who, and most importantly, who are not involved in government or supported by government. So we have, this is a fundamental problem. This is, again, our people are sovereign, just like the Greek people were sovereign. Our people are sovereign. Like the steppe people were sovereign. Our people are sovereign. But who else, what other people on earth are sovereign right now?
Yeah.
And what are they trying to take from us? Our sovereignty.
Yes.
Because they don't want the burden of truth upon them, and to have to discover, organize, and fund initiatives that are truthful and reciprocal. Instead, they want to become a managerial elite. It's extractive and prides themselves on their extraction, despite the fact that there's no empirical evidence. Really, in other words, there's no evidence that they're serving the people's interests. Right now, we know they're not serving our interests. We see it in the data. Right? They serve the interests of special interests. That's all. How does that mean special interests are always wrong? Of course not. Does it mean the people are always right? Of course not. I mean, this young generation is stupid enough to try socialism. Right? I mean, they're pretty stupid. So does that mean the population is always right?
You're going to get dinged for that term, sir.
What?
The S word that you just used.
Stupid?
Yeah, it's gonna show up on your stats. I just have to tell you, I'm informing you because I saw it in there before.
Was it?
It's as bad as the F-bomb, man.
Is it really?
Sorry, Curt.
Well,
I know we worry about the
stupid is a short term for lacking sufficient intelligence to answer the question at hand.
It is
thinking you can.
It is shorthand. Sorry.
So anyway, so there's a reason we're doing all this work. When people say that shouldn't be in the Constitution, I say, evidence is you're absolutely positively wrong, and there's no question you are wrong. That's the evidence.
Now the interesting thing, because it has to be airtight.
Yes.
That there's no argument to be had. It's that clear. It's everything is laid out. A perfect trail of evidence is left, and nothing is left to fall between the cracks.
It's got to be difference between math and geometry is it's easier to lie about math than it is about geometry, right? And so I always use geometry as the standard, and besides the fact geometry is basically trinary, right? So based on triangles. So I would say that it has to be as rigid as geometry.
It's interesting because when you mention geometry, it makes me think, is strict construction.
It is.
I like it.
And, that's the problem. What I always complain about is that mathematical physics is too often verbal construction rather than strict construction. And they won't. And the reason is if you can't produce a model that would produce that expression, and whatever. I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And, some models are really hard. I mean, the people who talk about climate, well, I mean, it's a hard problem, right? I mean, my whole thing is it's not clear the urgency is there or the severity is there or anything like that. I mean, even such, and then my big problem was, and I realize I'm speaking from experience of being involved, right? I know these people that started all this, right? I mean, I've sat at tables with them, discussed it, phone calls. Is that they have incentives exactly what people outside think they are, right? They're not good incentives, right? And they see it as their opportunity for
There's rent seeking and status.
yes. So on the other hand, if you look at the data collection and the predictions, it's not very good. So again, I'm not saying that it isn't having an effect.
Wait, I don't think that was right. Not very good is not the right construction of the sentence. It should be so very not good.
Well, again, you guys could fault me for all this, but I've been thinking about why I give people the benefit of the doubt.
Oh,
because you guys don't. I give people the benefit of the doubt because I think it's necessary to remove all doubt before you're making a judicial state question answer rather than a policing action. So I think you guys want to make a policing action, and I'm trying to make a judicial decision. And
we understand one another. I like that.
Right.
That distinction is good because I believe that it accurately describes the distinction.
Right. And so I tend to say I have to exhaust what I consider the tendency of humans to be kind of living dim bulbs living in bubbles. Right. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't mean there aren't just like people like me on our side and you who are thinkers, right? And are deliberate strategists and planners. It doesn't mean there aren't people like that. But in most cases, it's just incentives, right? And insufficient due diligence. That's how I view it.
See, the issue is this, and I would say you're right without question. You're right without question. But the issue is they're dangerous and committing crimes right in front of my face, and that's not acceptable. So it is a policing action that you're referring to. It's necessary to stop them continuing to harm the public.
So that's how I've become to understand because you can tell because I keep bringing it up that I'm like, why is it that I think differently from the guys? Because all of you tease me about this all the time. I mean, Martin in particular. Yes, Martin, you in particular.
You.
Martin in particular teased me all the time because I actually exhaust benefit of the doubt. Does that make sense? I work to exhaust people the benefit of the doubt, right? But that's because my job is judicial. I'm just trying to decide, right? And that's how I see it. Or it's basically logic and math to me, right?
Right.
And so, whereas you guys have a different thing, this is really bad. We got to stop this. So it's a policing action on your part, right?
It's right. Yes.
All right. So,
which is to say there's a different standard of decidability.
Correct. You're trying to stop the harm, and I'm trying to enact future prevention of it. Right. It's not I've come to understand what we're doing is not a conflict. Does that make sense?
Not at all. No.
Right. So if anyone wants to challenge, why do you put all that stuff in because if you look at our work, I'm going to.
This is Curt telling you he doesn't want to hear about it later because it's all been explained in this video.
Yeah, pretty much.
I
love when you reduce some subtlety of mine to.
I'm trying to make it simple for the audience because I'm for the slow kids.
For the slow kids?
I'm working for the slow kids.
So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, again.
All right.
If you go to here, right?
Okay.
So if you go here, we list the major reforms, right? We've actually, the page we're looking at, I hope I don't lose because I've actually deleted it. We've just gone to the list of the major reforms because we found out it was the two steps were too confusing. So we're just going to send people to list of our major reforms. Then we explain the declaration and why it's necessary. Then we state the declaration, right, as a declaration of reformation, which is basically reversing everything that went wrong since we we unjustly crucified the South. Then there's the preamble of the Constitution, which is just like the preamble to our existing, which does the same thing. Just like the Declaration is basically it's basically a legal in the common law. It's a common law document demanding redress of grievances. And the Constitution is the remedy we're demanding.
Yes.
Right. So, but if you look at it, the preamble explains why this whole thing is necessary. Then we start out with the laws of nature, the laws of in other words, the first principles of nature, the first principles of mankind, the first principles of language. And from that, we put together the natural law, then the rule of law, and violations of the rule of law, then rights and obligations. So basically, before we get to talking about organization or policy, we talk about the rules upon which all human cooperation is based.
Yes.
Then we move into the courts, and I put the courts first for a reason, because they are the first. They are the first institution of law. What the state is, what the government of the state is, and what government of the several states is. In other words, any federal government has this, and anything underneath it has this. And then we just go through the treasury, its function as a treasurer, the insurer of last resort, which should be probably reversed, the insurer of last resort, the treasurer. The military, the interior, the territories, the commons, the economy, the commerce, the people, their fitness, religion, education, and training, and the family. So we go through all these major institutions, all the institutional structure for assisting people in coordination. But what our Constitution starts with today is really the government of the state. And it really doesn't address, then it goes, what's the government of the state? It, as an ad hoc, brings in rights and obligations. So all these other things aren't addressed in our Constitution, given the importance of them. So this whole thing at the beginning is what we're basing the formal logic on. The preamble, the nature of the man, language, rule of law, the violations, rights, and obligations in courts. So we're establishing the strict construction of rule of law.
I'm going to address it a little bit differently. I think,
please.
I wrote it down in my little notebook here, which is the strict social construction by science is what we're doing, which is as opposed to mere social construction, which our enemies appear to be doing, which is not by science.
Right.
They're attempting to do social construction by mythos, inflationary language and lies, and false promises. And we are doing strict social construction here and defining it within the context of science.
Well, we're right, because we're doing that because we want to prohibit authority. And the reason you prohibit authority is hubris. And as you know, when as someone who's had a lot of influence, you know, I can tell you that hubris is a delicious bait, right? Because you become too overconfident in your own nonsense in your head. one case, a girl was working for me, was playing me, right? And I was falling for it. I can't help it, just smoking hot, right? And
Just
I'm
say,
just, and I'm happy to admit I'm just a guy, right? Right? I'm not I'm not special. I'm as
right,
vulnerable to that as anyone else.
right.
Um, and so I took the bait, and then I realized that she was just playing me, and that she could have turned it into what do you call it? The canceling motion.
Oh,
She could have flipped it as a cancel, and it really pissed me off.
I see.
All right, because she was just playing me, keeping the bait out there. Because as long as the bait out's there, you're giving attention,
Yes.
validation, support. Okay, I mean, I'm not showing a picture, but I mean, this is my ideal type. These little, short, 115-pound Russian women with white skin, blue eyes, and dark hair. Don't. I mean, it just basically makes my brain shut off, right? I mean, I have no control over it. It's like the equivalent of someone has epilepsy, right? They have absolutely, and I lose no control. I have a certain hot chick epilepsy, and most of my brain just shuts off and does.
It's just the combination, right?
It's just I can't do. I just become useless.
The bot.
The bot takes over, and I'm like, I'm okay. Well, I have the autism problem, and I have that problem, and Jesus, Anyway, so
Right.
my point was only that uh, when you have enough influence, power, whatever, no matter what the sphere is, it could be a small business, medium business, a large business, or an enterprise, or an industrial, or a political scale, or entertainment, whatever. There are people who are around you that tend to make your life easier. All right. And as your life gets easier, because that you tend to be able to fall into the spell. And Stoicism and Christian discipline are really good. Male Stoic and Christian feminine is really good defense against it. So people do stupid shit. Anyway, so what's happened is that the credentialed elite, they think they're smarter than they are.
They have every reason to believe it, and it doesn't have to be true.
And you know why? Because they're not actually responsible for running and organizing anything that includes risk. They're actually in the opposite position.
Oh, they're
No risk.
got their hand out for a grant. And they're granted something from someone who has the upper hand.
So when we say we need small government, I don't know what I always say. I'm not sure I know what that means. I think the problem is we need to have many governments that are smaller, right? And that work as markets instead of one government that is large. Because you're always going to move toward, it's like iron law of oligarchy on one hand, but the iron law of averages on the other. I mean, you just can't make decisions about aggregates all the time. It doesn't work that way. What you can do is you can find all these low level things that I'm making the best decision at this level, the best decision at this level, the best decision at this level, and the best decision at this level based on what I learned from this level, this level, this level, this level, this level. So while military orders can benefit from concentration of power, right, like the Chinese, the fascists, whatever, evolutionary powers benefit from the opposite, from the distribution of decidability all the way down. So we're just trying to make that. Now, one of the things we put in here is that you have to have the capacity to move from between the going concern, which is evolutionary, the military, which is defensive, and the redistributive, which is windfalls. Right? You have to be able to give that away. But you can't create a hazard. You can't create the hazard. You think authority ever wins. Authority is a way of running a going concern. But the people who get authority, they're going to try to keep it a going concern. You can't let people in the middle, which is the British, the continental thing post-war. You can't let them think that their going concern as a commercial place is free of having to move into totalitarian or fascist means to conduct a war. And you can't let them, the middle class, think that the redistribution is going to be good for people if it's baiting them into hazard of non-responsibility. Nor can you let those people think that the redistribution they're getting is alleviating them from responsibility, or that it's something due to them rather than a windfall that's produced because of all three states. So to some degree, this represents the state, the law and commerce, and the church, or the faith. And these three things have to realize that decidability has to shift based upon the environmental condition, when what everybody wants is whatever is in their favor: redistribution, commercial expansion, or power centralization. Right? Everybody wants that agency that's produced by that thing. We're greedy in terms of agency. So when I look at these poor idiots that are running the government that think they're smart, they're not. But they don't actually know what else to do. They're not smart enough to know what else to do. And they don't have incentives to do anything other than they're doing.
They're doing the best they can do, and they think they're doing good.
When they get up and lie before Congress, I don't understand why we don't have the Congress. Well, there's not a judge sitting there in Congress, or set of judges in Congress, when they're having somebody in there and saying, and the judge says, you'll answer the question or you're in contempt and you're going to jail. Because the problem is, in order to issue a contempt charge, too many people have to agree in Congress. So it becomes partisan. Where we need a judge in there to saying, you're either going to answer the question, or if you didn't come prepared to answer the question, then you're going to jail. Well, people will come to Congress prepared to answer the questions, and they'll answer the questions. But until Congress gets in the habit of throwing people in jail for 5 years,
right,
then
it's just stunning. It's like, okay, there's no responsibility.
There's no responsibility and testimony for Congress. As the people funding this, that, and the other thing are protecting the interests of their organization against the will of Congress. You don't get to have a will against the will of Congress.
That's right. That's sedition.
It's like the people tell the president to make executive orders. Well, I mean, there are times when the executive order needs to exist when the monarchy presidency has to restore law. Right, he has to act outside of the law in order to restore law.
Right,
but he doesn't get to do anything else. Right, it's like implement a policy that he prefers. Right, you have to make the case. I mean, that's the same thing as why don't we have a bunch of judges, basically the equivalent of the Supreme Court, say the president is allowed, just as the monarchy is, because that's where our president's more of a monarch. Other than being inherited, it's more of a monarchy than most other countries have monarchies, where they have more power. So if the president says, I want this policy enacted, well, he can't, it has to be that he has restoring the law, not violating it. Right? He can act, it's like the courts. The courts can act outside the law, so to speak. They can use violence, right, or appropriation or whatever, in order to restore lawfulness. Well, the Congress, and certainly the president or the monarch, can act to restore law when the political process of preserving the law has failed. And that's why we need a narrower group of decidability. That's why you need a judge of last resort. Because the last resort is when political processes fail. Now, you might say, as a political process, like this is a typical British thing, we want to get rid of the monarchy. Tough shit. You can't, because they're the decider of last resort. Right. And matter of fact, it's a crime. And what we're proposing is that it's a crime to try to use It's one thing of violating the law yourself, but it's just as much a crime or more, sedition, or treason, to try to violate the law through the Congress. And certainly through the presidency. But those are positiva laws. I'm sorry, did that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. I can't tell. So I'm doing a lot of explaining here. And not a lot of, well, it's only taken me half an hour.
That's right. It's a good description of the organization of the Constitution and why it's organized in such a fashion, which is a useful exposition.
Yeah. So, if I can get this organized correctly. Give me 1 second here, boss. Because I've sort of lost track of, there it is. I got so much of our last conversation last week.
Oh, yeah?
It was just fantastic. So, can I share my screen?
Yes.
So go ahead.
I'm good. I'm just sharing the screen.
And so we started here, and we're trying to figure out how to narrate this in simple forms, the before state, in other words, ternary logic, before state, during state, and after state. And so we did a lot of sketches. And so I did not get to where I felt it was possible to narrate that. Right. I'm not going to get to it today, obviously. What I got out of this was this diagram, which was like, how would we show everything together? And I said, well, these are the laws of the universe, right?
Right.
And these are the logical laws, right? That basically means consistency. It's ternary logic of the universe, the first principles, the science, the testimony, the grammars that result, the disciplines that result, and then there are the outliers, which is the variations from the discipline, in other words, lying and that kind of stuff. Conversely, the opposite direction is, in other words, that's the way we talk about the world. And we have the demonstrated interests that people show. We show acquisition, the sex differences, cooperation, reciprocity, and all the related things like altruistic punishment. Then we have reproduction, organization, production. We begin to organize and the means of organization, right?
Yes.
And then we have the informal institutions that arise. We have the biological forces, the class forces, the three means of coercion, which are basically on organization. The trifunctional elites that arise, the trifunctional formal institutions that arise, the path dependence, the resulting civilizational differences, the rates of civilizational revolution, the differences, the resulting differences in energy transformation per capita, and the resulting differences in prosperity. Does that seem like a pretty good outline?
It does.
What did you think of anything while I was going through it? Because I was always like, I want to, you could put these, I put these down here, but I could just as easily put them up here.
Yes. But they go, I like them on the opposite side because these are like mental functions. This is a description of neurologic functions and abstractions, and everything above the is material. Yeah.
This is cognitive. It's behavioral.
What's that?
Yeah, because that's cognitive and that's behavioral.
Yeah.
You could just, you like it this way instead of,
I just like them on the opposite sides.
yeah.
Because it's the cognitive is reflective, right?
Yes. All right, I like that. Okay. And I was did that so that I could say, how are we going to write this up? Probably. I don't think there's anything, I mean, I don't have to get into bilateralism, that doesn't matter. Probably could reverse these two. We have to
Yes.
acquire and demonstrate our interests. Probably push bilateralism here. Bilateralism. Bilateralism. Fine. Fine. Right.
Which is interesting. So if you look at your graphic there, it's a graphic representation of the information. Above the before, during, after, you have energy flow, and below there you have information flow.
Yes. Okay. We missing here. Would be enumerated. This is really it. This is all we end up with, right? These are this is the basic rule set.
Yes.
We'll switch this order here. This equals.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like there should be more structures like this.
Okay. Production and reproduction is on that scale.
Right, so it should be with reproduction, something production, cooperation production, association production. Reproduction,
Association, reproduction, production, association. I don't know.
I
Just
think it's
thought
this way. I think it's
something like that.
What's the three cooperative choices? Choose,
There's
boycott.
yeah. Boycott's a negative.
Elimination, conflict. These are both negatives, right? Or is that stay the same? And this is a plus.
Oh, there you go.
Looks about right to me. And what I'd like to do is be able to get to where we have an illustration like this.
Yes,
And then explain it.
yes,
Does that make sense?
I like that.
All right. Wish we had one more day. We need 3-day weekends, Brad. What just can I ask you while I'm thinking for a second? What do you think of the 3-day weekend thing? Why is it that we work 5 days, 5 days instead of 4? Is it really, it doesn't look like it matters if we work 5 days or 4.
I would have to ask a French union.
Trying to figure out if you threw that out there just to see what kind of response I get, because I think that's what you're doing. Because that smile on your face is telling.
Just like that, it's just we're productive potential, right?
Yep.
It's the limits of productive potential.
All right, so now we got.
It's a traditional function, right?
Yep. Now, for the purposes of illustration, should I flip this so that the cognitive's on top and the behavioral's on the bottom? Or is this fine?
Either way is fine. I like that they radiate away from the center.
Yeah.
Because there's a scale that is increasing away from the center.
Yeah.
And the cognitive reflects the behavioral. That's nice, man. It's just nice.
All right, so that gets me one of the deliverables. Uh, in going over this, because I've prepared for this, believe it or not, I prepared for this meeting. Not that we got into what I was prepared for, but I prepared for this meeting. And you know, the stuff and it came to, and then it clicked with me talking to people last night that you know, if you look at what we did here, especially here, right? This is rock solid.
Oh yeah.
So I'm probably going to ask this question 10 times until I actually internalize it.
All right.
My instinct is to not use diagrams like this. Is that stupid?
Is that stupid?
In other words, if we're writing, like I can understand, in other words, you're in a writing the pamphlet, I can understand using illustrations. I can't figure out if this is stupid of me to worry about when looking at this, whether where tables are useful. In other words, is there a reason to prohibit the use of tables and diagrams in the Constitution?
Oh,
When I think they're just so effective.
I don't see why you wouldn't prohibit them. If it's effective for communication. The problem that I would see is that a diagram is inflationary in
Yes.
some respect, and it lends itself to interpretation, and it's only suggestive. It doesn't.
Yes,
Does that make sense?
absolutely.
And so it lends itself toward hazard.
Yep. So it would be better to enumerate than use a diagram.
Right.
All right.
So I would leave them out.
I love you. Yes. What is that?
They can be in the science.
Right, because that's what we're trying to do there. Yeah, okay. Like, what's the real? I found that this chart, I thought this chart when I first did it, which is a long time ago. It was more than 10 years ago.
Okay.
I thought this was incredibly simple to understand. Is that this is the hierarchy of crimes: the criminal, the ethical, the moral, the criminal, the ethical, the moral, the political, the exclusionary, probably exclusion. So, extra political. So, and then I said, well, when you talk about voluntary exchange in the case of libertarianism, that's all you're really getting rid of. By getting rid of voluntary exchange, even blackmail, you're licensing all these crimes. So libertarianism is just a false claim of moralities for the purpose of enabling all these crimes.
Ah,
So
yeah, no, I understand. This is a recent understanding that came to me, which is I understand the principle there, which is the momentary agreement to engage in the trade.
Yes.
Is licensed to lie, cheat, and steal later.
Can I copy you on lie, steal, chill? I like lie, steal, chill.
Sorry.
No, that was good. I like that one.
I try really hard. I did not prepare so well for this meeting.
So you have is low trust private property, right? And you have high trust private property, suppressing all these things. And
Right.
so what I was trying to show by this line, which is the homogeneous polity, the heterogeneous polity, that it's the return on, in other words, the return on not taking advantage of others is high. But it's only easy to do inside of homogeneous populations. So I was trying to
Yes.
create a graph between the two of these. And I don't know why this is so hard to understand. What it seems, I don't know, it just seemed obvious to me. So
But you're because it's the issue with this graph is it's the scale on the left doesn't look like it's part of a graph. Does that make sense?
I see. So the fact that
If you made the graph, like draw some lines at every line, because it's got too much information inside the graph. You need to clearly indicate a line, say at immigration, across, all the way across. Faint.
okay, so this is what I was trying to get here, right? These dots represent ethical, production value added, moral, liberty,
Yes.
sovereign, right?
Yeah, there are scales. There's
That's the
scales.
scale.
I recognize the scale, but it's like it's not clear that that's a scale. That's
see.
why the graphic is difficult to comprehend, because it's got a lot of information packed in there,
Okay.
and it's not clearly a graph.
So the way to do is flip it and then make that clear. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, because there's a lot of information inside there, and it's sensible. I would make the scalar on the bottom larger.
Yeah.
So that it looks more like a graph, just to make it look more like a graph, and then make it show there's some kind of graph paper underneath there looking.
Yeah.
And then you could put little like these, that line on top, it's reproductive returns on foregone discounts. It's not clear that's just indicating that is this, that's drawing the graph that's of interest.
Yeah.
And then you go the high trust private property and the low trust private property. That those are field indicators, right?
Yes. It's really the top, that's really the top measure and the bottom measure. Because what we're really trying to do is point out these points. What
Right.
does ethical mean? What does voluntary mean? What is ethical, production value added? Which is what it's very European way of looking at morality. Then morality is free of externality. Then liberty is free of conspiracy. And sovereignty is free of external expropriation. So it's not clear that like the real graph is the green stuff, right? And then these are just the escalation terms underneath it. I get it. Okay.
Right. Maybe the green dot should go on the curve.
Yes.
Because then it indicates a clear travel.
I think it just be a line. It should be a line across here. Because these heterogeneous policies don't ever achieve them. Right? I mean, or they don't achieve them easily.
What's interesting, it's like I would maybe it would be better as a logarithmic decay function.
Yeah.
So that it starts out on the upper left with the sovereign and falls off at the lower right with the voluntary exchange.
Yeah. Should be below that, which should be chaos, right?
That's right. It could get worse.
Get worse. All right. And then this stuff is so powerful.
Right?
Right, this is so powerful. And so it just seems to me like we want to keep propagating, you know, in the science, we want to use this every time. Because that's how we reinforce, the pictures reinforce
That's right.
the simplicity every single time. All right.
Right. It's reflective of the internal consistency of the trifunctional nature of it all.
Right. All right. Well, we've used up our 2 hours.
Was it wonderful?
I had a lot of fun. Thank you very much. You're amazing.
I look forward to seeing our AI report.
Okay, well, I'll send it to you shortly, but I'll definitely post the video and add it.
Very good.
All right. Talk to you later.
Wait, should we tell them to like and subscribe?
Please do your thing. Do your thing.
All y'all, hit like, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell because you want to hear about it when we get these videos up. And don't forget to leave the glorious comments below.
Love you, man. Love you, folks. Leave comments. Bye.
Bye.